Hello and welcome to Real Cheating Story. Thomas Stonewall Jackson, Tom or Stone to his friends and family, looked forward to the upcoming weekend as he drove home that afternoon from work. Monday was Memorial Day, but he and Janice, his wife of 5 years, had been invited to spend a 4-day weekend at the country estate of her boss, Darren Hansen, a senior partner with the Remington Law Group, where Janice worked as a paralegal. Stone already had Monday off, so he took a vacation day to cover Friday. His boss, who also happened to be his father, was kind enough to let him leave early on Thursday so he could pack and hit the road. The drive to Darren's estate would take about 3 hours, given the freeway traffic and the narrow, winding roads leading to the property. He had high hopes for the weekend. Things had been a little rough with Janice over the last couple of months. She had become somewhat distant, often snapping at him for no apparent reason. Their physical intimacy, once a frequent and enthusiastic part of their relationship, had dwindled to a rare and reluctant occasion. Being a concerned and loving husband, Stone had tried to reach out to Janice, hoping to help her through whatever was troubling her. But she would simply shrug him off, telling him she needed to handle it on her own. Worse yet, Janice constantly rejected his attempts to reconnect physically or even emotionally, often pulling away when he tried to hold her or offer comfort. The situation was becoming unbearable for him, and he began to wonder if she was involved with someone else. Then, she told him they had been invited to her boss's country estate for the weekend to celebrate her promotion. Promotion? Tom asked, confused. You never mentioned anything about a promotion. How long has this been in the works? A couple of months now, Janice replied. I'm sorry, I should have told you sooner. Is that why you've been so distant lately? I guess so, she said quietly. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't mean to take it out on you. I've just had a lot on my mind. Tom smiled and wrapped his arms around her, though he felt a twinge of sadness when she flinched slightly. I can imagine, he said, trying to stay positive. And here I was, worried that you might be having an affair. He felt her tense up for a moment, but then she relaxed. Of course not, Janice said. I would never do that to you. He heard the words, but there was something in her tone that didn't quite convince him. I'm glad to hear that, Tom said, though his unease was growing. You know that's one thing I couldn't tolerate. I know, Janice said softly. So, do you think you can get off on Friday? A few days in the country would do us both a lot of good. Sure, I have plenty of vacation time. We can leave Thursday after I get off work if you want. That would be wonderful, she said, her mood brightening. I'll let Darren know and have everything packed by the time you get home. I promise it'll be a weekend you'll never forget. Stone thought about those words as he filled up the gas tank on his new Ford F-150, a four-wheel drive pickup. A weekend he'd never forget. He could only hope she meant that in a good way. But a part of him had mixed feelings, especially after the rather serious discussion he'd had with his father and uncle earlier. He pulled into the driveway, cut the engine, and headed into the house. True to her word, Janice had everything packed and ready to be loaded into the truck. He checked his bags, making sure his stuff was packed and ready. He was impressed that Janice had even packed his toiletries in his overnight bag. Then, he glanced at the other bags. You've got enough here for a week, he joked when she walked into the room wearing cutoffs and a t-shirt. I thought we were just going to the country for the weekend. You know I like to be prepared for anything, she teased. Why don't you get the stuff loaded up, and I'll finish up here? He saw that she had sandwiches on the counter and was packing a picnic basket with snacks and drinks for the ride, just like she used to when they took weekend day trips. Sounds good, he said with a smile. Maybe this weekend would turn out better than he expected. He loaded everything into the truck, helped Janice finish packing the food, locked the house, and set off for what he hoped would be a relaxing weekend in the country. This weekend is going to be the best ever. Janice gushed as Tom drove. Trust me, you'll have a great time. I'm looking forward to it, Tom replied, hoping she truly meant it. It took longer than Tom had planned to get out of the city, thanks to an accident on the freeway that brought traffic to a screeching halt. As a result, they were running almost 2 hours behind schedule, but that didn't affect Janice's buoyant mood, which pleased Tom. He filled the gas tank once more when they reached the road that would take them to Darren's estate. Then they followed the winding road through the hilly, wooded terrain. It was well after dark when they reached the gate leading to Darren's sizable 2-story home. Janice had been given the code for the gate, and soon they pulled up to the sprawling brick mansion. "Damn, this is one huge house," Tom exclaimed. 3 men in dark suits and sunglasses approached the truck as Tom turned the engine off. Tom wondered why they were wearing sunglasses in the dark. "I can get our luggage," Tom said as he opened the back door of the pickup. "No sir, that's our job," one of the men said in a serious tone. Another man extended his hand. "Keys, sir." "I need to park your vehicle," he said. "Please do as they ask, sweetheart," Janice suggested, her tone making it clear he should comply. Tom glanced at the man asking for the keys and noticed the subtle bulge in his jacket, indicating he was armed. "Sure," Tom said darkly, handing over his keys as the other 2 men grabbed their luggage and carried it off into the shadows without a word. "Thank you," the man said mechanically. Tom watched as the men effortlessly carried their heavy bags up the steps. "Are you coming?" Janice asked. "Yeah, sure." "On my way," Tom replied, following Janice and the 2 men up the stairs, still wondering why security would be armed. Something about it didn't sit right with him. "Ah, there you are. I trust you had a safe trip," a tall man with dark, curly hair boomed as they entered. Tom recognized him as Darren Hansen, Janice's boss. He had met Darren a few times at company events. Tom watched as Janice and Darren exchanged hugs before Darren turned to him. "Thomas, it's good to see you again." "I'm Darren Hansen," he said, extending a hand. "Welcome to my humble abode." "Thank you." "It's a pleasure to meet you again, Mr. Hansen," Tom replied, shaking his hand. "No need to be so formal." "Tom, may I call you Tom?" Darren smiled. "I have a feeling we'll be seeing more of each other, especially now that your wife is moving up in the firm." "Of course," Tom said, though he felt a bit uneasy. "Sorry we're running late." "There was an accident on the freeway," Janice explained. "So I heard," Darren said. "I'm just glad you made it safely." "Are the others here?" Janice asked. Tom wasn't aware that others would be there. "Yes, they're all here. Unfortunately, they've already turned in for the evening, wanting to get well rested before the festivities tomorrow," Darren replied. The man who had taken Tom's keys returned, handing them back. "Thank you," Tom said, putting them in his pocket. By now, the other 2 men had returned after delivering their luggage. "Harold, escort the Jacksons to their room," Darren commanded. "Yes, sir," one of the large men said. "We'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning," Darren said with a smile. "Sleep well." "Thank you," Janice replied quietly, her eyes cast down in a demure way that Tom noticed but didn't comment on. He simply filed it in the back of his mind, thinking, maybe Dad was right. "This way, please," Harold instructed in a deep, gravelly voice. Tom and Janice followed him up the spiral staircase and down 2 hallways before stopping at a locked door. Harold used a keycard to unlock it, and Tom heard the door click open. "Oh my," Janice gasped when they walked inside. The room was spacious and well-appointed, complete with its own bathroom, a double vanity, a large television opposite the king-sized bed, and a gas fireplace that took up most of one wall. "This is very nice," Tom said, forcing cheerfulness as he took in the room. "I'm glad you approve," Harold said. He pulled out 2 key cards, handing one to Janice and the other to Tom. "These are your keys to the room. Keep them with you at all times. Breakfast will be served at 7:30 tomorrow morning." "Good night." "Good night," Janice replied as Harold left, closing the door behind him. "This is a very nice room," Tom repeated as he began hanging his clothes in the closet. "Yes, it is," Janice agreed. Tom noticed she hung her garment bag in the closet but didn't take her clothes out. "So, who are these other people Darren mentioned?" Tom asked. "Oh, just some bigwigs from the firm," Janice replied, avoiding his gaze. "In this new position, what exactly is it?" Tom pressed. "I'm Darren's new executive assistant," Janice explained. "The position comes with a healthy pay increase, but I'll have to travel from time to time." "Are you okay with that?" Tom asked, his tone cautious. "As long as it doesn't interfere with our lives, that's fine. But you know we've talked about starting a family." "I know," Janice said quietly. "The last time was 3 years ago." 2 days later, his older brother Andrew was tragically killed by a drunk driver. A year before that, his mother had suffered a stroke just 12 hours after his dream, passing away 24 hours later without ever regaining consciousness. Tom sat up in bed, sweat pouring off his body. He glanced at the digital clock on his nightstand. It read 4:15 a.m. Though it was still early, Tom felt the urge to contact his father. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand but noticed there was no signal. Quietly, so as not to disturb Janice, he slipped out of bed, donned his trousers and t-shirt, and put on his shoes. Taking his keycard, he opened the door and was met with one of Darren's armed security men stationed at a small desk in the hallway. The man in the dark suit and glasses looked up as Tom emerged. "Is there a problem, Mr. Jackson?" the large man asked. "I need to use a phone. There's no cell service here," Tom replied. "Who do you intend to call?" "My father, it's important," Tom told him. "This way, sir," the man said, standing up. Tom followed him to a smaller room just off the hallway. "You can use that phone," he added, gesturing to a phone resting on a small table next to a chair. "Just dial 9 for an outside line." "Thank you," Tom said, sitting down in the chair. He began dialing his father's number, then glanced up at the man still standing in the doorway. "Can I have some privacy, please?" he asked. "Of course," the guard said, turning away from the door. Tom couldn't believe the nerve of the man, and he wondered why he was armed. He finished dialing and waited as the line rang. His father picked up after the third ring. "Hello?" "Who is this?" his father asked. Tom could tell the older man had just been woken up. "Hi, Dad. It's me, Tom. Sorry for calling so early in the morning. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. I was in the middle of a really nice dream, remembering your mother, but I'm okay." "Tom, did you have another one of your dreams?" "Yeah," Tom said quietly. He could hear his father sigh on the other end of the line. "Same as the one you had before Andy's accident?" "Exactly the same," Tom replied. "I see. Thanks for letting me know, son. I'm doing okay, but I'll keep a sharp eye out. Why don't you try to get back to sleep?" "Okay, I will, Dad. I just wanted to let you know." "I appreciate that, son. I'm fine though, I promise." "You're stuck with me for a while yet," his father assured him. "Remember what I said, and watch your back." They ended the call, and Tom walked back to his room. "Everything okay?" the guard asked. "Yeah, everything's fine, thanks," Tom said before opening the door to his room. He undressed and climbed back into bed. Janice groaned softly as she rolled over to face him. "Where did you go?" "Is everything okay?" she asked, still groggy. "Yes, everything's fine. I just had to call Dad," Tom said. "Oh," she murmured before rolling back onto her side. From her breathing, Tom could tell she had already fallen back asleep. He closed his eyes, but sleep eluded him for another hour as he kept thinking about the disturbing dream. Tom rolled out of bed at 6 a.m. and went to the bathroom to start his morning routine. Afterward, he took a quick shower and changed into a clean pair of jeans and a polo shirt. Janice followed him into the bathroom after he opened the blinds. Standing by the nightstand, Tom gathered his watch and wallet and looked out the window. He noticed the wrought iron bars attached to the outside of the window and wondered why they were there. There was no landing below, and the concrete pad of the driveway was at least 25 feet down. Looking outside, Tom saw a helicopter on a pad about 50 yards from the house. He hadn't seen it before. It was dark when they arrived the previous night. He also noticed guards carrying what looked like AR-style rifles slung over their shoulders. Tom couldn't help but wonder if Darren was expecting trouble. "Are you ready for breakfast, sweetheart?" Janice asked as she came out of the bathroom. "Ready as I'll ever be," Tom said, snapping his wristwatch on. "What happened last night?" she asked. "Another dream," Tom replied. "You mean like before your brother was killed?" "Yeah, exactly the same. I called Dad to make sure he was okay." "How is he?" she asked. "Fine. I caught him in the middle of a dream." "I'll bet," Janice said with a snicker, which Tom found vaguely unsettling as she finished dressing. "Come on, let's go downstairs and get some breakfast." "I'm famished." "Don't forget your walking stick," she reminded him. The walking stick was a gift from his father given to Tom after he was discharged from the hospital years earlier. During his service in Iraq, the Humvee he was in was hit by an enemy RPG. 2 other Marines in the vehicle were killed instantly, while Tom and another Marine, although severely wounded, managed to take cover and defend themselves until help arrived. Tom spent months in surgery and rehab and was eventually given a medical discharge. Fortunately, the doctors saved Tom's leg but had to replace his left hip. Rehab helped Tom learn to walk again, and the walking stick was very helpful. Although he could get around fine now, he still experienced pain after extensive walking, so he continued to use his father's gift. They arrived at Darren's table to find 3 other men and a woman waiting for them. Tom had briefly met the men before and knew they were executives with Darren's law firm, though he couldn't recall their names. He had never seen or met the woman before. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce my husband, Thomas Stonewall Jackson," Janice announced. Tom shook hands with the others. "Stonewall, huh? That's a rather unusual name," observed Glenn Oldman, one of the firm's executives. "My parents were big fans of the Grand Ole Opry back in the day, so they named me after a favorite country western singer from the 50s and 60s, Tom explained. "Dad used to joke it was either that or Michael Stonewall Jackson." "Yeah, I seem to recall that name," Glenn replied with a smile. "He died about 10 years ago, didn't he?" "That's what I heard," Tom said. The woman smiled as Tom accepted her hand. "It's good to finally meet you, Mr. Jackson. I've heard a lot about you." "I'm Eve Carson," she said. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Carson. Please call me Tom." "I hope you've heard at least a few good things," Tom replied. "I have heard a lot of good things, and I have a feeling we'll be spending a lot of time together this weekend." "Oh?" Tom asked. "Why is that?" "With Janice's new position, there are going to be a lot of changes in your life," Darren stated before Eve could respond. "Adjust? And why would I need to adjust to my wife's promotion?" Tom asked, a bit concerned. He looked at Janice for an explanation, but none was forthcoming. "It's complicated," Darren said bluntly. "Let's eat breakfast first, shall we? Maybe we can get to know each other a little before we get into the details." They sat down as Darren's employees wheeled carts into the room. Tom watched as they placed dishes of eggs, bacon, toast, and fruit in front of everyone. Another employee walked around the table pouring coffee into their cups. Tom also noticed the armed security men stationed on either side of the door. "So, Tom, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?" Rick Harmon, another executive, asked. "Janice says you were some kind of soldier or something." Tom glanced at Janice before answering. He had told her a bit about his service, but it seemed to have gone over her head. She thought anyone in a green uniform was in the army. "I was in the military but never a soldier," Tom replied, taking a bite of his scrambled eggs, which he found delicious. "Oh, what were you then?" Rick asked, glancing at Janice. "I was in the Marines," Tom answered. "Thank you for your service," Darren said. "What did you do in the Marines, if you don't mind my asking?" "Not at all," Tom said. "I was a scout sniper assigned to a force reconnaissance unit when I was wounded." "Scout sniper, huh?" mused Ryan Jones, the third executive at the table. "So basically, you killed people, right?" Tom noticed the glances exchanged between the other executives and the security men before replying. "I suppose that's one way of putting it." The glances turned into looks of concern, and Tom wondered what was happening. 32 enemy soldiers didn't finish their missions, he added lightly but with a tone that suggested a serious edge. "I haven't had to kill anyone in several years, though." "Interesting. You never told us this," Janice said, with a slight tightness in her voice, looking at Tom. She flushed slightly. "It's not Janice's fault," Tom said before she could speak. "I never told her exactly what I did in the service, partly because some of it is still classified and partly because that's a period of my life I'd much rather forget." "But now you're an accountant, is that right?" Rick asked hurriedly, breaking the tension. "Yes, I was discharged after my rehab and went to college to finish my business degree. That's where I met Janice. I'm now a forensic accountant working for my father," Tom said. "What does your father do?" Glenn asked. "He runs Jackson Specialty Investigations. They work primarily for corporations," Tom explained. "I've heard of them," Rick said thoughtfully. "They do good work from what I've heard." They finished their breakfast, engaging mostly in small talk. However, Tom still felt a very uncomfortable feeling about the situation. He had learned to trust his instincts on the battlefield, which had kept him alive more than once. "Well, it looks like a beautiful day outside," Eve said. "Why don't I take Tom for a tour around the property while we go out back?" "Of course," Eve replied. Tom looked at Janice, trying to gauge her thoughts, but couldn't. She had an expression he wouldn't want to face in a poker game. "Go ahead, sweetheart." "It'll be okay," she said encouragingly but with a hint of stiffness. "Yeah, okay," Tom said. He was uncomfortable with the situation but felt he couldn't do much now, so he acquiesced to Darren's arrangement. "Intel and recon and intel," he told himself, grabbing his walking stick. He looked at Eve. "Are you ready?" Tom asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "Sure," Tom replied, hoping the churning in his gut would settle down. Janice put a hand on his arm before he left. He stopped and looked at her. "Just remember that I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Tom said, leaning in to kiss her. But she turned her head, leaving him feeling shocked and humiliated. Tom backed off and walked away, not saying anything until he and Eve were far from the main house. Tom couldn't help but notice the heavily armed security men not far from them. With Eve's back to him, Tom pulled out his phone and activated the voice recording app. He saw he had a weak signal but enough to make a call, then put it back in his pocket. "It's so beautiful out here," Eve said, trying to break the ice. "Yeah," Tom replied in a noncommittal tone. They reached a wooden park bench overlooking a small pond and stopped. Eve sat down, so Tom followed her lead. "What's going on here?" he asked. "You're a smart man, Tom. Why don't you figure it out?" Eve responded. "I've got an idea, but it's too horrifying to contemplate," Tom said. "Why don't you just come clean and tell me?" Tom asked. "All right. As you know, Janice has been picked to be Darren's next executive assistant," Eve began. "Yes, I already know that. Janice told me that much. But there's more, isn't there?" Tom asked. "Yes, there is," Eve said. "Your life is about to change, Tom. Whether it's for the better will depend on how you react. You know Janice loves you, don't you?" "I've heard her say so, but frankly, I'm having a hard time believing it right now, Tom replied. Trust me, she does love you and wants the best for both of you. That's why she's willing to do whatever is necessary to guarantee your future, Eve explained. You do support your wife in her career goals, don't you? Of course. I always have, Tom said, feeling as if he were probing a minefield of emotions. I'm glad to hear you say that. Then you should understand that the next year or two will only be a minor blip in the road of a long, happy marriage. A year or two? Tom repeated. What's going to happen over the next 2 years? And what exactly is your role in all of this? I'll get to that, Eve said. My role is to prepare you for what will happen and to make sure you fully understand and embrace Darren's expectations for you and your wife. Why should I care about Darren's expectations of me? I don't answer to him, and he doesn't sign my paycheck, Tom said, his patience thinning. No, he doesn't. But he does sign hers, and your acquiescence will go a long way toward making Janice's job easier, Eve explained. Acquiescence? What the hell are you talking about? Tom asked. I'm sure you've noticed that Darren is what most people would call an alpha male, Eve stated, as though it were obvious. In other words, he's a self-absorbed narcissist. Tom growled at that. Eve chuckled, the first genuine sound she had made. Let's just say he expects people to fall in line and do as they're expected. That includes Janice, and by extension, you. In other words, he wants to control my wife and expects me to just accept it? Tom asked, his anger rising but firmly controlled. I wouldn't quite use that terminology, but essentially, yes. In fact, they've already been intimate several times, Eve said, noticing the pained look on Tom's face. And you know this how? Tom asked. I was there. I recorded it, Eve said, her tone even, as though recording intimate moments was perfectly normal. You're kidding, right? Tom asked. Not at all. Here, take a look. You might find it interesting, Eve said, handing Tom her phone. Tom looked at the short video clip of Janice and Darren. It is interesting. Mind if I keep a copy? Tom asked, thinking it might come in handy for his divorce. Not at all. I saved that clip especially for you, Eve said, using the phone's Bluetooth capability to let Tom save a copy to his phone. Tell me something, Tom. How has your love life been lately? Eve asked. Not that it's any of your business, but it's been practically non-existent for the last couple of months, Tom replied. Actually, it is my business. Darren instructed Janice to cut you off most of the time. He's quite possessive of his property, Eve explained. And she just went along with it? Tom growled through clenched teeth. Of course. He is her master now. She answers to him, just as all his previous assistants did. And he expects you to answer to him as well, Eve said. Tom cringed at the term master. He could expect that in one hand and in the other, see which one fills up first, Tom snarled, feeling the smirk on her face was a good reason to wipe it off. So what does Darren expect from me? Money? Tom asked. Hardly, Eve chuckled. He expects your obedience, your submission, and he will expect you to publicly demonstrate that tonight before the other senior partners. What are you talking about? What does he expect me to do? Tom asked, his confusion growing. The dynamics of your marriage will change drastically while Janice is in her current position. Darren has documents he needs you to sign. These documents state that you willingly surrender your marriage rights, property, and assets to him while Janice is his assistant. After that, he will expect you to publicly display your submission in front of Janice and the other executives, Eve explained, her face devoid of emotion. Tom's eyes widened. You mean he wants me to sign everything over to him and then perform acts of submission in front of others? Are you serious? His voice was low and furious. I am not kidding, Tom. Yes, that is what he wants. He also expects you to demonstrate your submission fully, Eve said. In fact, Janice is eager to see you do this. This will allow Darren to assert control over you and your marriage." Tom's anger flared. "So, my boss wants me to sign over everything, perform acts of submission, and be kept here while they go off to New York? And what do I get out of this? If you comply with Darren's demands, you'll be spared from severe repercussions. Although it will be humiliating, you'll be compensated when Darren is finished with Janice. However, if you refuse, you may face severe consequences," Eve stated. Tom's eyes narrowed. "So you and my soon-to-be ex-wife have conspired to ruin my marriage, take my assets, and humiliate me. Is that right?" "I wouldn't phrase it exactly like that, but from your perspective, yes. We worked together on this," Eve said calmly. Tom's anger was palpable. "Did Darren do this with his other assistants?" "Yes," Eve confirmed. "And they agreed to it?" Tom asked, his disbelief evident. "Yes, and they went along with it," Eve said. "In fact, the previous husbands found a way to deal with it. Janice would be eager to see you fulfill Darren's expectations." Tom's rage was uncontrollable. "They can all go to hell. If Darren tries anything, I'll make sure it's the last thing he ever does." "I understand you're angry, Tom. You have every right to be. But if you comply, you will benefit in the long run," Eve said. "Is there more?" Tom asked, his voice tight with stress. "Yes, the document also requires you to undergo a vasectomy and accept responsibility for any children Janice and Darren might have. She intends to make a show of flushing her birth control after you sign," Eve revealed. "And if I don't comply?" Tom asked, his voice cold. "Let's just say you wouldn't like the consequences. Those who have tried to oppose Darren have found themselves penniless and facing serious charges, with personal devices used against them," Eve stated. Tom's face hardened. "That sounds like a threat." "Call it what you want," Eve replied. Tom pulled out his phone and began recording the conversation, then looked through his contacts until he found the number he needed. Verifying the signal, he selected the number and held the phone to his ear. "What are you doing?" Eve asked, her face reddening with anger. Tom smiled and put a finger to his lips, signaling her to be quiet. "Sheriff Jackson," he said when the call was answered. "Stone, what's the word?" Sheriff Jackson asked. "Dad was right. I need an extraction, fast," Tom said. "I got the address. I also have the coordinates from your phone. What's your situation?" Sheriff Jackson asked. "There are at least 15 heavily armed men. There's a gate at the entrance, code 6973. Hansen and 3 of his executives are here, along with his trainer. She just gave me the lay of the land." "I have it all on audio," Tom said. "Copy that. We're on our way. ETA approximately 5 minutes. Can you hold out that long?" Sheriff Jackson asked. "I think so, Uncle Bob, as long as you're willing to call it self-defense." "Thanks," Tom said. "My pleasure. Wouldn't want to see anything happen to my favorite nephew," Sheriff Jackson replied. "What about Janice?" Tom asked. "According to Hansen's trainer, she's an accomplice and already on his side. We'll have to deal with her as well," Sheriff Jackson said. "I'm sorry to hear that, Bob," Tom said sadly. "Yeah, me too. Hang tight. We'll be there shortly," Sheriff Jackson said. With that, Tom ended the call and sent the audio file to his uncle. "What did you just do?" a frightened Eve asked after Tom put his phone away. "Who did you just call?" "I called for backup," Tom replied with a smile. "I need to get back to the house and warn the others." Eve started to rise, clearly disoriented by the turn of events, but Tom shook his head, holding her hand and gently pulling her back down on the bench. "I think not. We'll sit here and enjoy the sunshine for a few minutes. It might be the last sunshine you ever see," Tom said, allowing himself a satisfied smile. I think you might have bitten off more than you can chew this time." Darren and Janice, along with the 4 men, took their seats next to the large pool behind Darren's house. Darren, dismissing Janice's concern, scoffed at her fears. "What's he going to do? He's alone, unarmed, and surrounded by security. If he refuses Eve's proposal, we move to Plan B," Rick cautioned. "Don't worry," Darren said confidently. "We'll spike his drinks tonight, and when the time comes, he'll be more than compliant." "I can't wait to see it." Janice, giggling, asked, "Are you going to make him comply like you did the others?" "Of course," Darren said. "By the end of the weekend, he'll be begging for my attention," he added, causing Janice to laugh. "Just don't push him too hard," Ryan said. "He's different from the others." Darren sneered. "No, he's not. They were all weak. This guy is trained to fight. Be prepared for anything." "Settle down, Ryan." "I've got this," Darren scolded. He then asked Janice, "Why didn't you know about your husband's service?" "It's like Tom said. He never shared the details, just that he was in the military," Janice replied. "It doesn't matter," Darren said dismissively. "He's going down tonight, and your career will take off." "What if he files for divorce?" Janice asked. "Then I'll ruin him like I did the others." "He'll end up in prison or worse," Darren said. "Don't worry. I'll handle him." Suddenly, the telltale sound of helicopters filled the air. Everyone stopped talking and listened. One of Darren's security men ran to the pool, breathing heavily. "We've got a problem, Mr. Hansen," he huffed. "What's that?" Darren asked. The sounds of shouting and scuffling followed. 2 uniformed deputies, in body armor, walked to the pool, their rifles at the ready. "Freeze!" one of the deputies ordered. "Drop your weapon," he commanded the security man, who complied immediately. More deputies arrived, handcuffing Janice, Darren, and the other men. "What's going on?" Darren demanded. "You're all under arrest," a deputy stated, reading a list of charges and then the Miranda rights. The deputies led all 5 detainees around the building, where they saw helicopters, a bus, and several vans. Officers were escorting the handcuffed and disarmed security men to the bus. Janice saw Tom standing next to a large man in a khaki uniform. "Tom, what's going on?" she cried out. Tom and the large man walked toward her. "Your little party is over, Janice," Tom said calmly. "I forgot my manners. This is Sheriff Robert Jackson. You remember my Uncle Bob, don't you?" "Uncle Bob?" Janice gasped. "I didn't know you were a sheriff." "I guess it slipped my mind," Bob said with a smirk. "Please, this is all a big misunderstanding." "You have to believe me," Janice cried desperately. "No, Janice, I don't have to believe you," Tom said. "In fact, I've never been more shocked and disappointed in my life. I'll be visiting my attorney ASAP to have divorce papers drawn up. As of now, you're dead to me." Tom grabbed Janice's left hand and removed her rings, depositing them in his pocket. Darren snarled, trying unsuccessfully to break free from the deputies holding him. "I'll be out of jail soon and then I'm going to make you pay." "That sounds like a threat," Tom said, looking at Sheriff Jackson with a smirk. "It sure does," Bob replied. "We'll add that to the charges. It'll help ensure he doesn't get bail." "Don't worry, Mr. Hansen. My team will take good care of him." Bob chuckled, and then ordered, "Get these people out of here." Tom and Bob watched as the perpetrators were loaded onto the bus. Tom felt as if the last several years of his life were a lie. He had loved Janice from the moment they met. Bob, who had been through a similar situation years ago, slapped Tom on the shoulder. "It'll get better, son. Trust me on that," he said. "Thanks, Uncle Bob, for everything," Tom said. "You're welcome, son. If you need anything, give me a call and tell your dad I said hello." I think he has a bottle of his best waiting for your visit. I will. Is it safe for me to get my things? I need to get out of here, Tom asked. Sure. They should be wrapping up inside the place soon, Bob told him. After saying their goodbyes, Tom packed his things and went home. A week later, after discussing matters with his father, Tom saw the family attorney and had the divorce papers drawn up according to the prenuptial agreement they had signed before the marriage. He waited until the papers were served before visiting Janice in the county jail. This will be the one and only time I visit you, Janice, he said as she took her seat. I need to make sure you receive the papers. I got them, Janice said quietly. I've already signed them and sent them back. Good. As you could tell, I followed the prenuptial agreement. I'll wait until after your trial to handle your belongings. I appreciate that, Janice said. I don't understand something. How did you find out? You'll hear the details in court, but here's the summary. I suspected something was happening a few months before that weekend, but I didn't have any proof. About 4 months before Memorial Day, the estranged husband of one of Darren's assistants approached my dad with a wild story. He also brought some spreadsheets and documents he said his estranged wife got from Darren's system. Dad had me review them. I couldn't say anything to you due to privilege and conflict of interest. It took time, but we found evidence of all kinds of questionable financial dealings. Your lover did a good job hiding them, but not well enough. A couple of weeks before that weekend, Dad handed over the evidence to the feds, who were already interested in Darren's activities. They were set to raid your offices in June. Dad warned me to be cautious that weekend. We consulted with my Uncle Bob, the county sheriff where Darren's property is located. I hoped nothing would go wrong, but that wasn't the case. Eve Carson told me about your plans, and I recorded our conversation. Fortunately, we live in a state where only one party's consent is needed for recording. I have a few questions for you, though, Tom said. How long before that weekend were you involved with Darren? About 2 months, Janice replied. Tom was surprised by her candor. That's about when things started to fall apart between us. Did he tell you to cut me off? Yes, she said quietly, her face reddening. I suppose I should get tested for STIs then, Tom said, causing Janice further embarrassment. Did you really want to see me humiliate myself for Darren? Tom pressed. Janice looked down, unable to meet his gaze. Well, she said with tears in her eyes. Yes. Surely you knew I would never agree to that willingly. So why? Tom asked. Because I was so infatuated with Darren that I would have done anything he wanted. He enjoyed having power over everyone. If I didn't comply, he had what he called a plan B, Janice admitted. You mean the drugs? Tom asked. Yes, they found the vial with the chemical he intended to use on me. I had nothing to do with that, Janice claimed. That's interesting, because they found your fingerprints all over the vial, Tom said, causing Janice to look at him in shock. This suggests you were part of his plot against me. No, I never wanted to hurt you, Janice sobbed. The evidence says otherwise. Not only did you cheat on me, but you also plotted with Darren to destroy me. There's no way back, no forgiveness. Like I told you, you are dead to me, Tom hissed as Janice shed tears but did not flinch. I've wasted enough time on you. Goodbye, Janice. Enjoy what's left of your life. Before I go, I need to let you know that I have some friends in prison who are eager to meet you. It will be quite an experience, he added before walking away, unaffected by her tears. After several court appearances, Darren, Eve, and the others were found guilty of all charges. Darren, as the ringleader, received a life sentence in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The 3 executives, having played minor roles, were sentenced to 20 years each. Janice received a somewhat lighter sentence due to her lesser involvement. Several others in the firm were charged for their roles in the conspiracy. A few turned state's evidence against Darren and were granted immunity as part of a plea deal. By the time the legal proceedings concluded, the Remington Law Group no longer existed. Tom's divorce from Janice went through quickly and without a hitch due to Janice's prison sentence. Tom boxed up all of her possessions and placed them in storage for her parents to collect at their convenience. On July 4th, Tom, his father, and Bob celebrated Independence Day, along with the rest of the nation, with a barbecue and fireworks. Bob brought a guest to the festivities and introduced her to Tom. He was instantly captivated by the attractive, brown-eyed brunette in front of him and found it hard not to admire her well-toned legs accentuated by a pair of short denim cutoffs. "Son, this is Marcia Simmons. She just moved here from Dallas and started working with me a couple of weeks ago," Bob said. "You're a deputy?" Tom asked. "Sure am," Marcia said with a confident smile. "I'm also a former Marine," she added. "Bob told me you were in the Corps as well." "A sniper with Force Recon," Tom replied. "Nice," Marcia said. "I think we're going to get along just fine." Tom grinned broadly. "I think so too." "Care for a beer?" Marcia asked. "Sure," Tom replied. "I could use a fresh one myself." He grabbed 2 beers from his father's ice chest and handed one to her. "Your uncle told me about your last operation. It sounds like it was well executed," Marcia said as they sat down. "I'm sorry about what you went through with your ex," she added. "Yeah, well, I guess it happens," Tom remarked quietly. "The divorce will be final soon. How about you? I saw the mark on your ring finger. Were you married as well?" "I was," Marcia said. "Apparently, my husband wasn't as committed. I came home early one night and found him with his secretary, in our bed." "I'm sorry to hear that," Tom said. "If you ask me, he was a fool." "I agree," Marcia said. "I'm just glad we didn't have any children." "Do you have kids?" Tom asked. "No, thankfully. We were talking about starting a family when everything fell apart," Marcia replied. Tom and Marcia talked for much of the evening and had a great time. When Bob and Tom's father set off the fireworks, Tom felt much better by the end of the night. He believed he had met a kindred spirit in Marcia. "Are you about ready to head back?" Bob asked after the fireworks display. "I guess it's about that time," Marcia remarked before turning to Tom. "I had a wonderful time, Tom. It was a real pleasure meeting you." "I had a wonderful time as well, Marcia, and I'd really like to see you again if that's okay." "That would be more than all right," Marcia said, her smile broadening. She handed him a card with her cell number. "Your uncle keeps me busy, but I'm usually off Saturday nights. Give me a call." "I'll call you this Thursday," Tom said, returning her smile. He noticed his uncle's approving wink and smile. "Talk to you then." Marcia kissed his cheek, and they said their goodbyes before leaving. "Nice young lady," Tom's father remarked after they left. "Yes, very nice," Tom said with a grin. "I hope you intend to keep your promise to her," his father said. "Absolutely," Tom replied. "Good man," his father said, slapping Tom on the back. "Come on, help me clean up and let's see if we can polish off the rest of that beer." "Are you going to give me the day off tomorrow to sleep it off?" Tom asked. "Hell no," his father replied with a laugh. Tom laughed in return and joined his father, his mind on the sweet brunette with the captivating legs he had seen in quite some time. "Where will you meet your Waterloo?" "Every puppy has his day, everybody has to pay, and everybody has to meet his Waterloo." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.